is Long Way to the Top, and I'm your host, Shane Bryan. My next guest was a founding member of 80s rock band Killing Joke, influencing bands like Metallica, Nirvana, Soundgarden. A self-taught super producer, Youth started a label that was responsible for artists like Take That, Wet Wet Wet, Tom Jones, Maria McKee, and he's produced and worked with and remixed Kate Bush, The Verve, Guns N' Roses, Pink Floyd, U2, INXS. He even managed to get Crowded House to record naked. We'll get into that. Oh, and did I mention he's also a member of the Fireman with Paul McCartney? Martin Glover, known to the world as Youth, welcome to the show.
Hi, nice to meet you, Shane. Yeah.
Nice to meet you too. And I just got to say from the outset, you're such a quiet person. You're the unassuming producer sitting in the background that is just watching these albums pass through your sound desk that have influenced our lives.
Well, I think if you talk to some of the artists I work with, I don't know if they'd agree with you with that.
I was expecting that.
There are quiet moments, it's true, but not many.
Let's start with, I guess, your bass work. Starting in Killing Joke. Take us back to that. How did that all start with Killing Joke?
Well, going back further to when it started with bass, I mean, first time I picked up a bass and played it was for an audition for my first band, Rage. And I was up against 15 other guys queuing up in a rehearsal room to do this audition.
Yeah.
But I did play guitar, so I knew what a bass did. But I got the gig, and that set me on a roll with the bass, which I ultimately fell in love with.
Yeah.
I'd been in another couple of bands after that, Stilettos and then 4B2, where I made my first record. That record was made at Gooseberry Studios in Soho, almost 10 years to the day from when Zeppelin did their very first rehearsal in the same studio.
Wow.
Which I only recently found out. So that was a weird cosmic thing. There's a lot of Zeppelin corresponding paradoxes and parallels with my life. I don't know what that is. The magic, I suppose.
Yeah.
But when I first joined Killing Joke, I went up for what I thought was my audition of them. And they thought was their audition for me, sort of thing. So we got in the room and started playing, and Jazz and Paul looked at each other and said, "We're going down the pub to get some skins." Later on, I found out they were horrified and they thought I couldn't play it and they didn't know what to do. And I'd hitchhike all the way up to Cheltenham to do this. Left me with Geordie.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, me and Geordie started playing this one note, pulsing bass line. Geordie joined in and we just jammed on that for like, I don't know, 20 minutes. Jazz and Paul had gone to the pub to get the Rizzler. I met some friends of theirs there and they said, "Oh, how's the new bass player?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, he's great." And they were like, "Well, let's come back and have a listen." So they all piled back. And I'm standing in the room playing this one note with Geordie. Next thing I know, Paul goes to the kit, opens up a beat. Jazz goes to his keyboard, opens up a keyboard. And it all took off. That 747 took off. And that's how, and that became our first song, Are You Receiving? Yeah. And that's how it happened. And I said to Jazz, why did it take you so long to get back from the pub? And he said, in Cheltenham, is a bit, he said, "Oh, it's us and them." I said, "What's that?" He goes, Pink Floyd, Us and Them. I said, "What's that about?" He said, "You go to the pub and ask for a pack of Rizzler and you'll find out." So, anything to do with Rizzlers were to do with pot smoking at the time was considered suspicious. But that's how I started. Geordie actually was a good bass player. He's grade 8 cello, so he gave me a lot of instruction. But what all the band were actually very academically
Yeah.
trained. Geordie was trained A jazz, being classical violinist. Paul was very diligent beat player. I was self-taught,
Yeah.
but I'd had more experience than all of them because I'd made a record and I'd been on tour. So it was a funny dynamic. I was bringing the innocent, untutored element into this academic circle, you know,
Yeah.
really, which garnered me a lot of piss taking from the rest of them. But actually, it, I think that element was what really made the chemistry connect. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I'd say that, but I
Yeah.
think it really did because I came to it from a late thing, and also I was a Londoner coming from punk. They were all
Yeah.
from out of town, and they still had Jazz had a feather in his ear when I first met him. I mean, they were still a bit hippie, you know.
Yeah.
I sorted that out pretty quick as well.
Uh, Now, of course, being self-taught, you're also a self-taught producer. Where did that come from? I mean, this, I can do this myself.
It's a great mystery. I mean, first of all, it came from a sense of arrogance because I made this record with 4B2 with John Lydon producing.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
that was a revelation because all he did was get his mates down, get his dad down to play banjo, who was amazing, and got pissed. And they all pissed off and all passed out, which left me and the engineer. And I got involved with the mix and did a dub.
Yeah.
Mark Lasardi, amazing engineer, been trained up by Dennis Bovell. And I thought, oh, I can do this. This is where I was supposed to be. It was a revelation.
Yeah.
So after that, I went back to Killing Joke. I said, we're going to make our first record here and we're going to produce it. I didn't go so far as saying, I'm going to produce it. Why'd you do that? I've done it. Come on. So that's what we did.
Yeah.
And from that point on, we started producing ourselves. So the first 3 albums are written and produced by Killing Joke. So that was my basic introduction. But of course,
Yeah.
that's very different from producing an artist or artists you don't know
Yeah.
who are relying on you to make them sound amazing. That came a few years later when I produced Alien Sex Fiend.
Right.
And again,
Yes.
that was just really good fun. Ignore the Machine. I mean, it was #1 in the indie charts for months. And it kind of set me up. I started to get a few other mixes and other gigs, but I didn't really consider myself a producer till I think probably till I produced Pink Floyd. I mean, even through
Really?
McCartney, I was still seeing myself as primarily a writer, a musician, or something. Actually, no, that's not true. No, it was, well, when I got my first management, Big Life, I've
Yeah.
been with for a long time, when I was about 25. And I'd done a production for them of Dance Society. Yeah.
Dance Society.
And that had gone to #1 in the indie charts. And then I had a meeting with them that I'd asked for. I said, look, could you help me find a singer? And they said, why do you want to do that? I said, well, that's what I do. I write songs, make records. They said, no, you're a writer, producer, rarest cat in the jungle. I was like, oh. Basically, they ended up managing me, putting me in with Yaz.
Yes.
I did The Only
The
Ways
Only
Up
Ways
with her,
Up.
Matt Black and Cold Cut as a co-production. And that was it. That was #1 in the UK for 13
Yeah.
weeks. So
Yeah.
phone didn't
Still,
stop ringing
we
after that.
still play it on classic radio as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's a great
Yeah.
record. Love
Yeah.
it.
I mean, there was
Yeah.
a lot of records like that. I mean, some of your early albums, The Cult, obviously, I imagine that's where you met.
Colt was a bit later.
Yeah. That was where you met Ian Grant.
Oh no, I didn't meet him then. I met him later on. I think I
Yeah.
met him around the Stranglers time
Yeah.
actually.
Right. Right.
But when I produced the Cult, that was 2005. It was much later.
Yeah.
But I knew the Cult. They were massive Killing Joke fans, as all
Yes.
those bands were.
Yes.
Um, and yeah, the first thing I really did with Ian Grant was John Sinclair album. John Sinclair was the MC5 manager. He came up with the phrase, if you're not part of the solution, you're part
Part
of
of
the
the
problem.
problem. Yeah.
He was an original beat.
Yeah.
He growing up in Detroit and done a lot for the city there. John Lennon had done an arena concert to get him out of jail for one joint.
Yeah.
It was a massive pro-cannabis campaigner. And then he was living in Amsterdam, which was a nice place for him, running a radio show there in the early 2000s. And I did an album of poetry with him, which we managed to well, Ian, and between us, we all managed to get cats like Keith Richards, the guitarist,
Alan Clayton.
Alan Clayton, who was Dirty Strangers, but also Brian James from the Damned first lineup, and a host of other people, Zodiac from Zodiac Mindwalk, and make this amazing album.
Yeah, yeah, it was a great album too, and incredible guy, wasn't he? I mean, you know, the life that he lived, John Sinclair, and you know what, he was put into jail for 2 joints.
Oh no, crazy! I mean, it's still like that in some countries. Can you believe it? He said lighting a joint. It must be. What's the law in Tasmania? I mean, it's pretty legal in Australia now, isn't it?
No, it's illegal. Yeah, no, it's
not even medical.
Not even, no. Yet, you know, the funniest thing is Tasmania is the largest grower of opioids in the world.
Wow.
Yeah,
in the world. That's why you look so relaxed.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, well, the irony here is the drug czar politician in the UK, or used to be, his wife runs the biggest cannabis medical farm in the UK. She got the license. You get a lot of corruption. We used to think corruption was just in like developing countries, but now we're all beginning to realize that the biggest corruption is in the biggest country.
Yeah.
And things like that. And I think also politicians like Trump and Farage have ennobled politicians to be brazenly corrupt now because they can see they can just get away with it.
Yeah.
I still love the idea of democracy as conceived by Plato as a for the people, by the people.
Yeah.
And of course, when that really kicked in was in France in the 17th century when they had their revolution, democracy, liberty.
Yes.
And I think they might get a much better deal out of it because they had that than we do here. There's not quite so much corruption going on there, but they still have a lot of corruption. It's part of human nature, isn't it?
It is. And there's nothing like a good revolution just to shake things up a little bit.
Yeah, well, but the revolution I'm interested in now is another revolution of love, another summer of love.
Yes.
That's kind of what I've been putting all my energy towards the last 8 years. I started an arts lab. I worked with, I did the Allen Ginsberg event last week.
Yeah.
And the arts lab we put on a Summer of Love festival a couple of years ago. It's starting to happen again, especially now the world's gone so far to the right.
Yeah.
I mean, and America is actually really closely resembling 1938 Germany now.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
it totally is.
I think that's ennobled many normal people just to like become a bit more like public in their demonstration against that. I was in a couple of airports recently, kids wearing silk scarves, long hair, big flares. That's their way of saying we don't buy into that.
Yeah. Actually, talking about like that Summer of Love and it. You produced an album with one of my favorite artists, and that was PM Dawn, Set Adrift on Memory Bliss, you know, which is very, you know, I guess got that underlying Summer of Love sort of vibe, but you know, throwing in a bit of rap and everything like that.
Well, they came up around the time of De La Soul. De La Soul kind of changed the course of hip hop by getting a bit hippie, really.
Yeah, didn't it? Yeah.
And PM Dawn followed through with that, but made it even more pop. You know,
Yeah.
some of the biggest hits I ever had was with PM Dawn. We had 3 top 5 US singles,
Yeah.
and yeah, it was a real delight to work on it. Yeah.
Such an underrated artist, in my opinion. Like, you
Oh
know,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Now, you obviously you gained a lot of experience as a producer doing pop
yeah.
and that. Your big break, what you have called your big break, was Crowded House, which we, I mean, they're a New Zealand band, but we kind of adopted them over in Australia here.
Well, there's 2 Aussies, 1 Kiwi, I think.
Yeah, yeah. It's more
Paul
More
has,
Aussie than Kiwi.
yeah, maybe, yeah.
So you did the
Um,
Together Alone album.
I did, and it was a
Yeah,
massive break for me. I mean, since The Only Way Is Up, I had a good run of big hits, singles, and records within the dance music idiom, the emerging
mm.
ambient trance, things like that. But things like Little Fluffy Clouds, The Orb, and
Yeah,
Blue Pearls, Naked on Earth. My managers, again, very clever. So look, you're getting more known as a dance producer. We want you to work with bands and be an international
yeah,
name as a producer. I was like, okay. So they got me working with more bands. So I worked with James.
yeah,
I did their album Sound, which was great. And then I had a meeting came up for Crowded House, and I mean they just done the 12 million selling Woodface
yeah.
with Mitchell Fruit. So
Which was a
there's
great
no
album.
shortage of.
Yeah,
It's a fantastic album. I mean, incredible album, and Mitchell did an amazing job on it. And and you know they were they I mean they had every major player producer in the world
yeah,
like open arms to them to do the follow up with that, including Mitchell. But they'd been touring for 18 months. Mitchell, so the band had told me, had actually pulled in drummers like Steve Katner and Steve Gadd,
yeah. Wow.
as they do in LA,
Yeah,
on Woodface on a lot of it, and so a
yeah,
lot of the band aren't even on it.
yeah,
And I was shocked at that, but they were magnanimous. They were like, whatever helps the record, you know. And I think what they wanted was something that was going to be a bit more like a real
mm,
band. And
mm,
but not even that. They when we started pre-production rehearsals, they said you don't have to humour us. If you want to get session guys in, do it. Don't pretend you're going to get us on the record and not do it.
yeah,
And I said, no, 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 you're going to get it. I mean, I see bands as like a little sacred. Nevertheless, songs are more important. If the song does demand something else or someone else outside the band, I wouldn't hesitate to suggest it or get it
yeah,
in.
yeah, yeah,
But with them, I said, no, it's going to just be you. So anyway, I don't know why they picked. I think Neil said he liked my record collection when he came over to my studio in Brixton. But they're like what I was saying. They were pretty burnt out from 18 months of touring on the
yeah,
back of that. But we made this incredible album, which a lot of the fans say is the best album. I wasn't going to chase Woodface and try and
no,
copy
no.
that or push Neil to write songs that could do that. I just wanted to make a great album, and Neil was down with that.
It
And it did end up selling like millions and millions, but
it
not
did,
quite as
yeah.
many as Woodface.
But it was probably the first real Crowded House album that I listened to over and over, whereas the rest were great albums. But it was almost a concept album.
Yeah, it was their Dark Side of the Moon, I thought, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Yeah,
Tell me,
yeah.
tell me about the whole producing or performing in the studio naked. How did that come about?
Kiwis and Aussies, I found. I've got an Australian stepmother, so I know the dynamic very well.
We
Um,
just love getting our gear off.
well, they can be very competitive,
Yeah, right.
possibly because there's overcompensating for being so far away or something. And that can be in sports, music, or drug dealing or whatever. They want to be the best, you know.
Yeah.
Bank robbing. I think as a high proportion of the world's top bank robbers were Kiwis, and of course Robert, who wrote Shantaram, one of
Yes.
my favourite books.
Yeah.
I was an Aussie Kiwi bank robber, but I think they thought, I will show this young punk from Brixton that we can do anything he can throw at us, you know. And I did throw a lot of curveballs at him, and I said, look, let's do a take naked. So like you're really vulnerable when you're playing, you know. It wasn't, and they took it. Oh, hey, go on then, and and you know, it kind of worked. I think it was that take was the take we used on the record. Although it was painful for Neil because he got the back of his Telecaster have those tight coiled springs right against his paw pubes, and when he went to do a big Pete Townsend whammy, he got them caught. So he let out a huge yelp. But God bless them. Yeah, they did do it, and it was great. I love working with them. You know, I thought individually they were really lovely. I
Yeah.
mean, all quirky and eccentric, and collectively they're all very different, which
Yeah.
great bands are, I think. But put them together as a singular thing, formidable. And
Yeah.
very sad about Paul passing away too early.
20
What
years
a
ago.
great drummer.
20 years
Yeah,
ago. Yeah.
terrible. Terrible. That was a big shock. I still think about him. He was one of the funniest people I've ever met.
Yeah.
And he reminded me of Jack Nicholson often. Often he would slip into dark cynicism, which wasn't so good. But his humor was so sharp.
Yeah.
All of their humor was sharp, you know. I had to really keep my wits about me at the time. Nevertheless, at the time, I was spending half the year in India. I had a house in India,
Yeah.
and I was doing a lot of meditation. I was taking a lot of LSD. I was doing loads of things like that. So I wasn't phased by any of that.
Yeah.
But I encouraged it. You know, we go climbing waterfalls and stuff, and
Yeah.
Neil would always win.
Yeah.
And anything competitive, they always have to win. You know.
Yeah.
So for me, being this sort of South London hippie punk, I didn't care about winning. But I'd use that to get them going. And I go,
Yeah.
I bet you can't do this. And they go, oh, just you
Of
show.
course we can. Yes. I
And so
love
we
it.
got a lot of great performances out of them like that.
Can I ask before we finish that conversation, what song was it that they performed naked on?
I think it wasn't Distant Sun. It could have been Black and White Boy, Paul's song, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, to be honest, I can't remember now.
Well, there you go. You got a visual anyway.
It was up tempo, I remember that.
It was an up-tempo one. Now, of course, after that, you then went from Together Alone, and you created an album which I think is one of the best albums ever created, and that was the Verve Urban Hymn.
Yeah,
And it was
quite a few years later.
equally brilliant, but also so destructive. It destroyed the band.
Right. Well, the band, when I started Urban Hymns, the band had already split up, and it was actually a Richard solo album.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the
Kind of all
disintegration
over.
started before that. And I kept writing the Verve on the whiteboard where I put my notes and pissed Richard off. But eventually, I mean, he'd re-employed the band as session musicians. So it was the Verve, albeit Nick McCabe, where the big fallout had been. And in the end, it was so obviously the Verve. We brought Nick McCabe back in, and then it was the Verve.
Yeah.
But then it very quickly disintegrated again. So the chemistry in bands can be so volatile. It's just not worth the trauma of doing that, something you know will be hugely successful, but you just can't face it because there's so much trauma there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Between a few of them, it wasn't just one of them. So
But that
I know that with my
sometimes,
own experiences with Killing Joke.
but
Yeah.
that sometimes creates the greatest, like that tension. Sometimes
Yeah, if
it's
they
like a
can stay
diamond.
in the room.
Yeah,
But I mean, if the tension's so great and the trauma's so
yeah,
great, they won't be able to stay in the same room for very
yeah,
long.
yeah.
You have to use some very stealth Jedi psychology skills to make that work,
Yes,
you know.
yes,
And that includes trying to sort of create new experiences that are fun.
yeah,
So a lot of what we were doing was outside of the studio a little bit. I was doing these exercises. We walk back from the studio to our respective cottages in the valley of the moon at the end of the night, and we'd have to walk along the ridge of the valley. And if there was no moon, it was so dark you couldn't see a hand in front of your face.
yes,
So I get us to walk in a line with me leading, barefoot, and I'd say, feel the energy of the land through your feet. You don't need your eyes. You'll sense it.
yeah,
And we start off at a walk, and then it would be a little slight trot, and then a jog, and then we'd be hands off, just running into darkness down into this valley on this ridge. Occasionally, someone might slip, but it was quite a gentle catch from the earth. And you'd be screaming. You come down into this little wooded copse at the bottom, and everybody'd be like, "Wow!" And you'd gone through a complete fear. It was an amazing experience. It was very bonding
yes,
and hilarious because you couldn't believe how your feet could sense where the ground was,
yes,
and liberating, and all those things that euphoric. You came out, you feeling you've and felt really good. And the studio session where you just had a 45-minute argument about a snare beat, it's not like 100 miles
it's
away
gone.
behind you, but you could get to your cottage,
Yeah,
go to bed, go to sleep. And it drew a line under. I was doing a lot, I was turning onto a lot of things like that
mm.
in India, and doing a lot of meditation and stuff like
Yeah,
that. That was bringing into that I still bring into those circles when there is trauma, and
yeah,
you know uh, you don't want to be afraid of that, because that chemistry, that opposites
yeah,
clashing, that is what is the chemistry of the great record.
yes,
It's just how to manage it. Bands aren't equipped to manage that on their own. They're not even very good at describing the sort of sound they want to do or what they do. That's why they're musicians. They
yeah,
put their expression through their instrument. I've had to learn how to do that
yes,
as a producer. When I was a 20-year-old musician, I was a blunt instrument.
yes,
Um, I wasn't very tactful or diplomatic,
yes,
and I'm a South Londoner, so I was brutal, really. But I've had to learn how to use those skills to
mm.
get it all together and keep everyone in the room, and doing the best music they've ever done. Sometimes when it's too harmonious, I go the other way, and I have to create some disharmony in there,
Yes.
an edge, to get them going the other way. It's a funny thing. It's a lot of magic. It's very druid.
It's a very, I was going to say, it's a very, you're almost like a spiritual advisor to them at the same time as being a hard ass producer.
That immediately reminds me of the Metallica movie, monster movie, where they actually have a psychotherapist on tour, which everybody laughed at the time, but
So
actually
true.
it did enable them to do that tour, make
Yeah.
that record when they were going through a very traumatic period. But the guy was just on the take in the end, wasn't he? So,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's the problem. You become staff and blah blah blah. I mean, the great thing about me is I'm not really trying to be a spiritual advisor to them in any kind of overt way. I might make some suggestions
Yeah.
in that direction. I might do a lot of that stuff for my own well-being, but I'm really there to make a great record.
Yes.
Um, and so that but I'm not even there to, as a therapist would be, to discuss that. I'm quite self-taught as a psychologist, as I am a bass player. But I have done my research, and I've read a lot of books. I've got a lot of friends who are psychologists, and psychiatry. It interests me greatly. I've done therapy at times, and I've met some amazing people. And I think one of the best books I read for bands was a book on group therapy.
Yeah.
It was a manual for group therapists, and it was about how they had to stay out when you create that circle
Mm.
in group therapy. Anyone can say anything except for
Yeah.
the therapist. Actually, has to stand aside, just let it happen.
Let it happen. Yeah.
Um, so, like, say you're in a group therapy for alcoholism, and somebody gets up and says, "Okay, my name's John, and I haven't had a drink for like 2 weeks, and I'm an alcoholic."
Yeah.
But someone else in that circle would stand up and say, "That's bullshit. I saw you in the pub last week, pissed," you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
But the therapist couldn't say that. You
Yes.
know what I mean?
Yes.
The therapist wouldn't be allowed to say that. So it brings up stuff that within the boundaries of psychiatry you wouldn't be able to do. It's amazing thing, group therapy, I
Yes.
think. And of course, and the premise of this book is if you form a group of more than three people, it automatically, the circle automatically defaults to the family dynamic.
Yeah, that's
And
interesting.
yes, crazy.
That's why they say, even a manager shouldn't manage any more than four people,
Right.
because any more than that, you can't get that family dynamic happening.
Yeah, but the problem with the family dynamic is it's psychotic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That doesn't bode well for our leaders of nations who have to manage hundreds of thousands of people,
No,
does it?
no, not
But
at all.
the family dynamic is psychotic because to join the family group, you have to sacrifice your own identity for the
Yeah.
family identity. Um, and um, therein lies the psychosis.
Mm.
And uh, and we all know that because we're all generally part of families, aren't we? We know what
We
it's like
are.
with sibling rivalry and stuff like that. So it's the same with bands. So often, but the great thing is about that circle is whatever problem comes up in it,
Yes.
the solution will be found in it as well.
Yeah.
So again, you have to step away and just let it come. So often we'll be having a big problem within the studio. The circles in the live room where I'll, I might throw the problem in. I might say that we need another, you know, section here, another chorus or another,
Mm.
give it to me and just do it spontaneously and let them and it's just like throwing a grenade. They all start. But I know if I just go and make a cup of tea, leave them to it, by the time I come back, they probably found it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's really about knowing when to leave the room. Also,
Yes.
when I'm producing, can irritate bands this because they kind of expect you to be this sort of doctor figure who's always there with his arm on your shoulder, saying,
Yes.
"Yes, you do it, go on," and taking care of every bit, which is there's a lot of elements of that, but it's essentially, you know, it's really knowing. Look, I paint, I write poetry, I
Yeah.
do drawings, I make sculptures. I might be doing that while we're recording in the control room,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then can't you focus on the bass for a minute? But I'll do that because it takes me out of the circle for a moment
Yes.
and allows that circle to find its own solution. It
Yes.
also gets my mind out of obsessing and going around in circles on this one problem, puts
Yeah.
it somewhere else. And by the time I put my focus back, I've got a whole new, fresh perspective.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's very complex and layered and multi-dimensional how I work. And a
That
lot
is
of it
incredible.
comes from being when we talk about the spiritual element, I joined a Druid order 35 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's 20-year education, actually, can be. But that's informed what I do, and that's the magical side, the bardic side, which goes very, very well with the psychology, actually.
Yeah.
They both operate in same areas of the brain, soul, I think. And so a lot of those techniques I'll be using there will be a bit more druid, like it's timing of the sessions, that how we pace it, where we do it, the psych geography of it.
Yeah.
All of that comes in, like me recording in the pyramids, recording in New Zealand with Crowded House and Kerry. All of these things are equally as important as which mic we put on that guitar, for me. But they are not so easy to unpack necessarily, but they're there.
You've in addition to, obviously setting that scene, you've produced some rather unusual albums as well. Gyoto Monks of Tibet.
Wow, that
would have been a very interesting one to do.
Very spiritual, deeply spiritual experience. I had my 11-year son with us assisting with a Neumann ambisonic head microphone, which is shaped like a human head.
Yes.
And he was wandering around with this head on the stick, recording the monks while they chanted in their monastery, as well as other mics and stuff. I had an engineer as well. But it was a very bonding experience for me and my son. And he became the star of the show. The monks loved him, and they thought the head was the best bit.
Yeah.
So it was very surreal and broke down a lot of, I'd already spent a lot of time in India. So I'd lived in India for 10 years. But actually living in the monastery with them, working with them, was really enlightening in many ways, that I hadn't expected or hadn't seen before in India. And I'd done a lot of ashrams and holy men in India as well, and I've met some incredible people. But being in the monastery at that time and place was just incredible. And I learned so much, and how they use sound and repetition and trance, ecstatic trance, same as the Qualia musicians in Pakistan. Phenomenal. It's but in a different way, and so giving, so beautiful. And then so non-judging. I remember being outside the back of the pagoda of the temple of the monastery one day, and the abbot of the monastery came. He said, "I'd like to introduce you to this Rinpoche. It's very important, and it'd be great if we could introduce you." I said, "Yeah, sure." And I was just smoking a little spliff out the back, and I put it out. Oops, And they said, they said, "How's it going with the recording? Are you getting what you need?" I was like, "Yeah. It's incredible." And actually, while I was recording, a week-long ceremony, Manakala ceremony, goes on for a week.
Yes.
They'd never actually had a full recording of it. So I managed to get sort of that done just for them.
Yeah.
I gave them like a hard drive and 30 CDs of the whole thing, unedited, that we recorded. But I had lots of different mics and stuff. But I distilled it down into one album, and it was a chill out crossover album as well. So I've got another album of Just the Chance, a double album of Just the Chance. Some of the weirdest and most magical ones, which I offered to them, and they didn't put it out. I suppose because they'd done so well with the crossover one. And actually, Decca released it. I suggested a couple of years ago re-releasing it with these extra chants on as a sort of anniversary edition, and they were considering it, but that hasn't happened. But it will happen. That will come out. But
I actually have that
Anyway, I
album.
said,
It's a
yeah,
great album.
yeah. I said, yeah, it's going very well. I said,
Yeah.
the only thing is, I'm not sure if I'm quite pure enough to be doing this
Yeah.
really important work. That and recording what you do, you know. And they said, what do you mean? Not pure enough. I said, well, how do you know? Uh, I said, I smoke. You know, I have a drink. I love women. You know, they said, no, 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 you got it all wrong. We are the honored ones to have you here.
Wow.
And I was so humble. I mean, beautiful. And actually, because the album being a big success, I was very, very proud to be part of it. The following year, on the back of it, they were invited to do a thing on the main stage at Glastonbury, and that was the buzz of that year's Glastonbury.
Mm. Oh, yes, I remember
That
them being on stage. Yes.
Yeah, and they got on the front page of the Times.
Yes.
A picture of them at Glastonbury. It was a big story,
Yes.
and my intention and hope for that album at the time was to increase public's awareness of their
Yes.
plight,
Yes.
and their situation enough to give them some more support. I mean, India had been very kind to them,
Yes.
taking them in in '59 after the communist China took
Yeah.
over, invaded Tibet, and they had to leave. And India provided a home for them in Dharamsala. But they were still oppressed and still are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this album, when they were on the cover of the Times, I'm like, that job done.
Yeah.
You know, it's all about
Yeah.
raising awareness of them, the beautiful culture that is all our culture. We're all part of the same family.
Yeah.
You know, their lineage and history. Um, it really did a huge amount to put them back on the map, and their plight and their problems. So I was very, very happy with that. And I'd agree with this. Certainly one of my favorite albums I've ever made, and one of the strangest. Yeah, because I personally believe there's a big connection with Druids and Stonehenge and
Yeah.
all that, and the Victorian Druids and the Western magical tradition, and the Eastern Indian,
Yeah.
Tibetan Indian mystical traditions.
Yeah.
There's actually a book, Wild Wales, Gerald Durrell, I think, where he suggests he made the correspondence. Welsh. I'm half Welsh as well. My mother's Scottish. The Welsh tradition, the Welsh language is a very unique language. Hardly any connections to anything else. Similar to the Basque language as well. But there's very little. There's a little bit of Gaelic in there from Breton as well, Breton Gaelic. But 50 words in Welsh are the same as they are in Sanskrit.
Wow.
And yeah. And
That's
if you look at
incredible.
the English language, which I absolutely adore, it's half Latin, and it's half German. And the German side of it and bits of the Latin side of it is kind of Indo-European. I mean, most anthropologists of today would agree the source of that was India. And so there are remnants and cultural things that hang over still today in London from an ancient, forgotten time when we were all coming out of India and Africa, bringing the same sort of theology and philosophy with us.
Yeah.
And so I recognized in the Tibetan monks something I sensed in my own Welsh bardic culture.
Yeah.
And it was great to see this living, because we lost most of that. What was reinvented in Victorian times was a reinvention. I mean, there are thin, maybe lineage threads through the orders, the Druid orders and Wicca and stuff. But most of it was lost and successfully rebranded through Christian intervention,
Yes.
you know, over centuries. But it was beautiful, and it was a great experience, and I really look forward to going back to that monastery and seeing
Yeah.
the monks again, and I have to say thank you to them. They taught me so much.
Yeah.
Um, Absolutely incredible
It
experience.
it all makes sense because I have a friend in Australia, which you know, by the name of Nadav, and you actually produced his mantra album.
Oh, the Dove, yes,
Yes,
lovely guy, and
beautiful guy.
that
Yeah,
he spent a lot of time in India, and
he
his
does.
mother as well.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I thought you were going to say Maureen. This is the Australian woman who put that album together. I think
No,
she's
no.
dead. I'm not sure. I was writing to her a couple of years ago to try and get this deluxe
Yes,
edition of the album out, but and no word from her. But she raised a lot of money from it. Nadav, yeah, I did a great album with him and my
sensational
studio
album.
in Spain, Space Mountain, and Devotion. I'd still got a new album out for Manika Carr, who's Curtin devotional singer, with the Sikh tradition. And
Yes,
we've done an album where it's an album of chanting, but she's used chants from all around the world, including Druid ones, Buddhist ones,
yes.
and put them to this kirtan. In lockdown, I was doing some Kundalini online yoga with a very good Kundalini teacher in LA.
Yeah,
And the music they would do at the end was really interesting. It was again sort of multi-faith, but kind of worked well with ayahuasca, it worked well
yes.
with Kundalini breathing, I think. And I thought, yeah, I'd like to do an album that she would play at one of her online groups or something. And it got me going. And so proposed this idea to Manika, and she went for it. That's just coming out now, and it's beautiful. And Nadav's album was very similar in that
Yeah,
respect.
yeah,
He was a practitioner, worked with people doing yoga and
yeah,
meditation and
yeah,
devotional work.
yeah,
But he also did performances. So
yeah.
it was finding that balance. Where when you're making an album, you have to the context is everything. So
Yes,
it's like I'm really influenced by Bauhaus movement at the moment, the art movement.
yeah,
Form follows function, which was one of their main
yes.
taglines. So I'm so into it. I'm starting a college where Matt Black from Kolkata are based on those principles.
Right.
Um, and Yeah, form follows function, which is all about context. So if it's going to be a record, a release, a CD, or a vinyl,
Mm.
it's got to bear repeated listening to, especially, and if it's
Yes.
for devotional, meditational work, again, repeated listening. So you have to make put in a gift that keeps on giving with that,
Yes.
so that it doesn't become stale. It renews itself through repeated listening.
Yes.
Um, and there's a lot of magic in being able to do
Yes.
that. And Nadav totally got that and dived into it.
Mm.
Yeah, it was joyful. It's you get whether any kind of music artists come in with their song and they think, oh, the producer's going to record my song and it's going to be fairly straightforward and simple, and that's it. But once I get in there, and I start working what I do. I mean, the improvisation, the spontaneity, the
Yes.
arrangements. The song may get completely destroyed in the process, but something else will emerge that is even bigger.
Yeah.
Um, and artists that can terrify artists is asking them to jump off very high cliffs doing that. And I mean, when they just thought we were going to record this song, and it just turns out to be this whole mystery school glass bead game epic quest,
Yes.
that's involved in just recording this little pop song. But that's what I do. That's who
Yes.
I am. You know, um, And someone else will have to explain me better to you than I could. I mean, but it's not just putting mics in front of amps
No.
and someone performing a simple song.
And
That's just
and I think
that's what
that's
it looks like. But you know,
that sort of really answers a lot of questions about, you becoming a self-taught producer, not a producer that got, well, you're going to go by the books and you're going to do this, 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 and this. It's like, no, I've got to actually feel and flow with what is happening in the studio here. And if I can't get into that flow, then I may not get to the other side, to that album, to that that work that's going to keep on giving, like you said.
well, it's just yeah, you don't know. I mean, it's a voyage of discovery. It's the Odyssey. You start paddling and you sail off from shore, and then you're in
Yeah.
navigating that, being the captain of that ship, so to speak, as a producer, um, is essentially what I do. So I often don't know where it's going to go either, but I'm a, I trust my intuition, and I'm an
Yes.
intuitive producer.
Yes.
Um, and I'm also don't mind being wrong. I don't mind going the other way if the way I was suggesting wasn't working out either. So there's many things being a producer, and but I get fully involved in the creative process, and generally I'm I'm quite good at articulating it now
Yes.
with the artist, or what part better, let's say, than I
Yes.
was. I'm not so arrogant. I'm not
Yes.
so stubborn. I'm not so. Nevertheless, when I really feel something should be away, it's very hard for me to let go of it. But I've learned a lot, and I enjoy that process now. I enjoy
Mm.
the discovery of it.
Mm.
And I kind of calibrate the way we do it so that it encourages and allows that to happen more than it
Yeah.
wouldn't. But I'm also a responsible person, even though I'm quite a free spirit. I take what I do seriously, and I understand that the consequences for the artist and the band, it's the next 5, 10 years are going to be
Yeah.
determined by what we do there, good and bad.
Yes.
So I, you know, I think I have integrity with that
Yeah.
basic premise of doing everything I can think of to make it work as best it
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, it's been amazing chatting with you. And before we go, though, I do want to talk about the Think Loud project.
Yeah.
So Think Loud for Parkinson's. You resurrected a one of the original Killing Joke songs, War Dance.
Yeah, well, we've had a series of Killing Joke in dub albums over the last 10 years or
Yeah.
so, maybe longer, that have become very um, successful, and the band and the fans love them.
Mm, mm.
Of course, we started off our first single, Turns Red. We were doing dub mixes on those, so it's always been part of our remix. If you listen to
Yeah.
our early records, there's disco and dub within the rock sound.
Yes.
So it's always been part of what we do. And when Ian asked me to provide a band, we couldn't create a new track, so I said I can do an exclusive dub of one of our old
Yes.
tracks. So I did a few dubs of War Dance actually, but then I did one specifically for the Think Loud project, and it was a great pleasure. And it's an eclectic album. I've just opened it and filmed myself opening it.
Yes.
It's got the Water Boys on. War Boys I love. I used to know Anthony Thistlethwaite, the fiddle player. But
Yeah.
I met Mike Scott a couple of years ago Granada, where my studio is, and he they were playing the Alhambra Gardens.
Right.
Can you imagine what a gig?
Yeah.
And it's only about 1,200 people. Patti Smith has done it. Bob Dylan's done it. I mean,
Yeah.
the Waterboys do it. But it's a sit-down gig,
Yes.
in this beautiful garden, surrounded by the Alhambra, one of
So
the great
nice.
wonders of the world. Um, and the keyboard player, um, I know, and he'd appeared on my Youth Meets Lee Perry album, Spaceship to Mars, and he invited me backstage. I went backstage. I hadn't met Mike Scott before. I wanted to meet him because he'd lived in Findhorn, and he's a conscious, deep-souled person,
Yes.
from what I gather. And he was great. He was pissed off. He didn't feel it would been a good gig because they'd done Madrid and Barcelona before, and they were big standing only riotous gigs. And this was a John Teal sit down gig.
Yes.
It was a bit more of a polite audience. And so he was disappointed. I was like, but you're in the Alhambra, in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and we love it. But it was a great gig, and James, his keyboard player, is incredible as well. But they didn't have a fiddle player. That threw me.
Well, see,
But
they should have because they were renowned for that.
well, I just listened to an interview with him, and he's doing the Life and Death of Dennis Hopper, which I've heard a couple of tracks on. That sounds amazing. What a concept! Brilliant. And
What a
he
great
said what they
concept.
do now is do half an hour greatest hits,
Yeah.
half an hour of the new album, half an hour of greatest hits, and then everybody's happy. And that's a good way of doing it.
Yeah.
In the past, they'd done just a new album, everybody was disappointed.
Yeah.
And we've had that. I've had that with my band as well. And I've had both Geordie and Jazz say, "We don't want to do Love Like Blood. We don't want to do 80s." I said, "Look, can you imagine if there's a kid is been a fan for 5, 7 years, never seen the band before, and you don't do his favorite song, you're going to come away disappointed."
Yeah.
I mean, having said that, I've seen Dylan and not recognise a single song he's done and loved it. So, I think there's that element as well. You don't want to play to the gallery too much, but you don't want anyone to go home anything less than totally blown away, really. So, so that's great. But anyway, they're on it. He's got John Cooper Clarke, one of the great bards, one of the great poets, and Anne Dressers, who was on Bella Floyd's podcast the other day, brilliant. And it's got Arthur Brown on, who's a bit of a druid, actually. He's a hedge druid, but he's got a deep soul, as is Leo Sayer, with Marcella Detroit from Shakespeare's
Such a great
Sister,
guy.
another great band. I thought Donovan was on it, but he's not. But John Sinclair is.
Richard Thompson and Hugh Cornwell singing together. I mean, it's just amazing.
Richard. Yeah, I'm a massive fan of Richard Thompson. Yeah. I'm a big fan of Hugh's songwriting as well. Richard Thompson, from the Fairports onwards, I'm a massive psychedelic folk aficionado. So what he did with the Fairports and others, and Penta stuff, I adore. And there's a young band at the moment actually called Tubbs, where the singer really sounds like Richard Thompson.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, worth checking out.
Yeah.
And I'm very honoured to be. To be honest, I've got Tony Hadley. I don't know how he got on here. Can you explain that?
He just gets in there.
That would have been cool if he got Tony and Gary Kemp back together. Yeah. That's unlikely.
Yeah.
But it's Mike and the Mechanic. It's amazing. It's an amazing album. I think. Yeah. I'm not sure about this sleeve though, I must say, but that's the whole thing about it is supporting Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Yeah. It's close to my heart. My mother's got dementia. I'm taking care of her most weekends now. Everybody I know as a family member who's got Parkinson's. My brother-in-law, my sister's husband. He's got Parkinson's. He's very frail and fragile now.
Yeah.
It's a crazy condition, and it's so under researched, and we know so little. So I mean, it seems to be affecting whole generations now.
Yeah.
So we have to pick up the slack from where governments don't, and raise money for the charities that do the most of the research. And it's a very important job, and I'm very honoured and proud to be part of it.
And of course, Ian's got Parkinson's himself, and he's put this incredible project together, which it just blows you away.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, well done, Ian. Brilliant.
Yeah, incredible. Look, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. I really appreciate it. I'm glad we went deep. I love that. You know, it
was a good one, I thought, actually. Nice one, Shane. Thank you.
Thank you. And
I didn't know what we were going to talk about. No, we've gone really deep.
I never know until I switch the mic on. So you know, it's that's great. And I'll put the links and everything up for your work and your record label, and also I'll put the links up for the for this album as well. Think Loud. Which
great. And send me a link. And thanks for your time and your questions. They were great questions. Actually, it really got me going. Thanks.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you for joining us on the show. Appreciate it.
All right, pleasure. Cheers.